You're recording it?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, didn't let you know ahead of time.
Dude, didn't agree to this at all.
It's always one of my favorite things to get to sit down with Bill. We've been doing this now for several years, and I remember back to the first time how stressful it was for me because, you know, I like my structure and I like to know where things are going, and that's just not really where Bill, how his mind works. So it's taken us a while to hammer out our systems here, but I think we're getting better at this.
That's what my wife says all the
Yeah.
time.
So
She has to put up with that all the time. By the way, Katie Kerpane is leading our March Madness. Yes.
thank you.
That's important.
Speaking of order and structure,
You wanted an example?
Yeah.
There it is, man.
Yeah, there we go.
March Madness and Jesus. That's good.
So we're actually wrapping up our study of the book of Mark today, and I'm just curious before we jump into things with Bill. You know, we've been in the book of Mark since September, and I know that's a lot of time to think back over. But is there anything from the book in reading it together this time that stood out to you, either a point that we made in a service or just something from reading the book? Some of you filled up your pages in your little Mark booklet months ago, but I'm just curious, is there anything that's going to sort of be a takeaway from this series for anybody? Immediately, yes. The whole title of the thing was Right Away Jesus. And you hear that again and again in Mark, how Christ is so quickly there. Anything else?
Well, I was kind of thinking, why do we have to be in a hurry to do this? Because there were several comments, we're still here.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yes. Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that support. There's no rush to get through a series. Yes.
God is not a hard thing.
Yes. And really, there's just so much good in his word, and it really doesn't matter what the passage is. You can just continue to mine it for good things, even if you're there a while. Yeah. Anything else?
I liked the one where Jesus is asking, "Who do you say that I am?" And that he invites us to use our voices and to answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, I hope it's been a good series for you as we've gone through it. And as we wrap up today, what I'd like to do, I want to read through a section from the last chapter of Mark. And when I told Bill kind of where I was thinking of going earlier this week, he grabbed my yellow pad from me and immediately began writing on it, which is not what he normally does, but it told me that he had some things to say about this. So what I'd like to do is just read through the passage, and then I'll set it up and then hand it over to you and ask you for your thoughts on this. But let's take a look at Mark chapter 16, starting in verse 9. It says, "Early on the first day of the week, after Jesus had risen, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had driven out 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, who were mourning and weeping." So that would have been the 11 primary disciples. "And when they heard that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they did not believe it. After this, Jesus appeared in a different form to 2 of them as they walked along in the country." This is the story we talked about last week. And you can see why I moved from Mark to Luke to tell the story, because that's all Luke gives us of detail. he's always just so abbreviated. So anyway, these two that were walking along in the country, and they went back and reported it to the rest. But again, they did not believe them either. Later, as they were eating, Jesus appeared to the 11 and rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." We're going to stop there. There's a little bit more at the end of the chapter. But I was thinking about this little section, and there's a little bit of a pattern that we see here that I hadn't noticed before, which, if you start with Mary Magdalene being the first person, she is experiencing this sadness and this sorrow at the loss of Christ. And it's not just sorrow, it's also trauma, because we're told that Jesus had cast 7 demons out of her. And you go, anybody who has been through that kind of experience, there's a lot of darkness that they've been dealing with. And so she's feeling all this, and she has this encounter with Christ. And in that encounter then, from that, Jesus sends her back to the 11 disciples to tell them that he's alive. And of course, they don't believe her. But then after that, next incident we see in this chapter is with the 2 people on the road to Emmaus. And again, we were told in Luke that they were there was sadness on their faces. They were really sorrowful. And it wasn't just that they were sad, they were also in despair, because everything they had hoped Jesus would be wasn't coming true. Their expectations had just been decimated. And again, they have this encounter with Christ. And it's out of that encounter, then the first thing they do is they turn around and they get up and go back to Jerusalem. They go on this mission to tell other people that Jesus is alive. And again, the 11 don't believe them. And so then finally you have the 11 disciples. And so they were told here by Mark that they were mourning and weeping. They're in sorrow, but it's not just sorrow. It's also sin and doubt, because Jesus said their hearts were hardened and they were full of this disbelief. But they have this encounter with Christ. And again, where does it end? Is as soon as they encounter him, he sends them out on this mission. And so I was thinking about these sort of 2 directions that we've got going on of the gospel, and how this is also true for us as well, where Jesus meets us in our sadness, and all we've got all those things going on, right? That they were dealing with, and Christ meets us in that, but he doesn't just leave us there. He also has us looking outward and not just inward. And this is where I want to get Bill's input on, because it's really hard to do both directions at the same time. And do you want to jump to that passage?
Yeah.
All right. So this is where he went. Well, okay. This is out of sequence for me, but I did.
I know. This is what we struggle with.
Yes. So, all right. Let's hold on this for just a minute. We will come to this.
It's like Braveheart.
Because I've got a few more slides in between, and everybody would have to close their eyes till we skip ahead.
You don't want to reveal.
Right. Well, I mean, we can, but
No,
but I want to just get your thoughts here first before we jump to this passage.
Okay.
So, this whole idea of Jesus meeting us in our sorrow, but not leaving us there, and how easy it is to just stay there. What would you like to say? And then we'll go wherever you would like to go.
I think this morning was a little different for me around sorrow. So it's different to talk about something when you're in the middle of it, or to talk about something more intellectual, or hey, I just want to offer up this thought. In the midst of sorrow, I was fishing yesterday for, this weekend I think I did 24 hours of fishing in 48 hours. So I have a good friend of mine that I love to fish with, and we go out to this place called Rocky Ford, and it has these gigantic trout, and you really have to work hard to catch them. And he's a good friend. This is not just a fishing story, by the way, but every once in a while he'd be like, whoa, it kind of freaked me out. And what's going on? And he's like, look at the sun. Look at the way that it's hitting the hill. Look at the pelican. Thank you for your friendship. Like, he's just exuding with joy. And he's fishing, but he's also receiving at the same time, which is one of the reasons I love to fish. It's just, you're taking this stuff in as you're doing something. And it just occurred to me how much tragedy and sorrow he was experiencing at the time. My family and I are going through hard things. I've grown up going through hard things. So one of the things I think about this is sorrow isn't instantly relieved sometimes. And it just kind of hangs out. And I go through all the human experiences just like everybody else, which is to hate it, to get mad at it, to say things I can't say here, to struggle deeply, to be in pain, to be confused, to be in despair, experiencing the trauma, the sin, the doubt. And I think there's this invitation that I've seen more and more as I've gotten older, the deeper my sorrow is because of my understanding of things and experiencing things and getting older and all that, the deeper that he wants to meet me right there. And I think that that's just continually surprising to me. And very painful to take in, but also comforting at the same time. So when we're talking about sorrow and mission, I think when I first came to Christ, I was really on mission. I just wanted to be something for Christ. And that has been stripped away over the years. But I think it's why a lot of times when we encounter Christians, and I was one of them at some point, we're just really wanted to share the good news, wanted to make sure everybody knew the gospel, which is super important. But I lacked the encounter. And so it was really tinny. It didn't get to the depth of what Christ was actually offering. So I didn't embody what it is that people are needing at that point. And Jesus is humble enough to show up in that every day. But I think without that encounter, I don't know how transformation happens. So I think it was necessary, as I think about all the disciples. Everybody had their idea in mind about how it was going to look. And
Yeah. Thank you for going there. I think, I think that is really, that's really true. Without that encounter with Christ in that place, that depth of sorrow, then the mission becomes all these other things. It's just about checking a box or feeling good about what you're accomplishing.
I think it just becomes about doing rather than being.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me sad sometimes about church structures or any structure that requires that you perform.
Right.
Because it really cuts off with receiving. And in a season where things aren't turning out the way I want them to turn out, I found a depth in that. A release from having to work so hard, an acceptance of the pain and sorrow that's around, a deeper appreciation for the people who are around me and that love me, and an acceptance of what I can and cannot change. When I was out in the hallway, the sun was beating down, and I'm looking at a maple tree, and the sun's hitting me, and it seems like a nerdy thing, right? Like you're just sitting there and looking at a tree. But the reality is, it's like the simple things that God is offering us every moment are available. I'm not always available. And I feel like I'm trying to protect myself from hurting further, and the more I do that, the less I can see him when I do that. But I think he's kind enough to be like, of course you're doing that. Yeah. And I'm just going to shine through that. I'm going to keep showing up for you until you're ready.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well that's kind of back to the two people on the road last week who, were so deep in sorrow, and they couldn't see him. They couldn't see him there in it, and he was still there and showing up in the middle of it.
I was asking God what I should share today, because I really didn't have any idea, plus I was tired from fishing. And I don't hear God say things, but it just sounded like, just share your broken heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think, what really connects these two things is your sharing your broken heart is the mission. Like that, you're sharing Christ's encounter with you there, even when it's still broken, is the work that he's doing that he can use. And this is where we get to the...
But that's why the fishing was so good.
Yeah.
I was fishing with somebody who is experiencing something similar and just has a broken heart.
Yeah.
And we're laughing and enjoying things, and I pulled him into the water by mistake at one point, and then, we're enjoying good cigars and talking about life and appreciating our families and actually just being in the moment for 13 hours straight while you're fishing, right? And it was beautiful. So there's a joy there too. I guess that's what I want to share, is like, I'm being comforted in the midst of suffering. And I don't deal with suffering well all the time. And I get annoyed and I get angry and, I get fearful. And I get pulled off, and I don't think he cares. Not at all. I think I just have to keep going back to mostly, which my prayer now is just help. Like I can't do much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's the reality of that sorrow not going anywhere, not changing, and yet there's also, you say you can't do much, but there are many people in this room who could testify that you continue to do so much and have, it feels like Christ doesn't wait for that sorrow to get healed up completely or removed from the picture. Even for these disciples where he just has rebuked them for where they're at. That's not a real motivational speech to get out and go tell people about that you believe in me, and yet, while they're still raw and in that place, he's also inviting them into this outward motion thing, because it feels like we can naturally go the other way, where we turn so inward when we're in this sorrow that it's just about isolation and pulling us deeply inward. And so just that juxtaposition of the two things, it's still somehow there's this invitation outward in the midst of that.
That's really good. I mean, if I'm good at anything, it's because I've been wounded deeply, and God's chosen to use that. I think it's at the point of sorrow where most people come in, even if they don't know that they're full of grief and sorrow. Most people come in because they feel worthless or bad or can't figure out or feel lost or don't know how to get out of what they're doing, or something's failing around them. And I think that pain that we all experience, we're supposed to have a community around us or people that can hold that grief while we heal. The other part of it is that it's supposed to lead us to a bigger pain. That pain isn't the only thing. It's supposed to lead us to a deeper pain, the pain that Christ went through, and the sacrifice and the resurrection. I think too often our pain becomes myopic and it becomes too small, because what we want to do is get smaller, and we want to bunker in, which makes sense in grief, and sometimes we need to do that for a time. But that's not the purpose of life, to bunker in and get through the vulnerability and the risk that it takes to be in pain and suffer, and then come out of that and lead into a deeper suffering, is supposed to create where the joy and the abundance and the life is. And so many people carry so many things. We all do, from young, whether it's abuse or neglect or trauma or peers or whatever. I'm looking at all the teenagers, my teenagers. Oh my word, like the world we live in just becomes so about myself and how's your pain and what are you, and are you bipolar or not? It's like, hold on, like there's a human being in there that's suffering and needs to receive something. And that doesn't happen because you're looking at social media or whatever. So I think God's design is to work with where we are most broken, and we're supposed to receive there. And that receiving, by the way, isn't just for us, though it's intimate. It's supposed to be spread out.
Now we can go to your
now we can
verse
to the list.
Your verse that you had mentioned earlier. Do you want to talk about?
Can you read it? I can't read it.
I'll lean in a little bit, and I can. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we're comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort.
It's a lot of comfort.
It's a lot of comfort there. Yeah. So I feel like that is that's true that God comforts us to comfort other people, but I feel like there's also, in this idea of inviting us outward from the point of our pain, it feels like it's not just about other people, though. It's also, there's something in that for us in engaging.
Yeah, I think it's very intimate. The thing that you said where it seems kind of harsh, that he's going after them, rebuking them. I think there's something really intimate about the way that he interacts with each disciple, and when they're in their sorrow, I don't think it's just like a mad rebuke. I think it's like, go out and do it anyway. Because I think he's like, that, you already have it. You have the doubt, you have the shame, you have the sadness, you have the pain. Now, all you have to do is receive from me and go. And so I don't think it's mean. Like, I think it's like a good dad who knows where you should head, even if you don't feel like it. But I also think it's really intimate and vulnerable and open to receive what God has for us. And if we can't receive it, I don't know what I'm going to give you. Because if I'm not receiving it, I'm giving you something that I think I'm really important around.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm important. I just think I'm loved and valuable.
You had made a comment on Tuesday that I wrote down that was, receiving from Christ is where we're most ourselves. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes.
Will you say a little bit more about that?
This is just my experience of it. So, I've seen this in people who have received a lot. Like an example of my wife, who is just faithful and has a loving family and shows up all the time. And when I watch her do her things, it's really who she is. I did not grow up with that. So when I heard that Christ was redeeming me and wanted to offer me something, that blew my mind. So I didn't know who I was. I didn't have that connection to myself. And so I found in Christ myself. Right? But that didn't come right away. That came over periods of time where Christ was pursuing me and parts of me from very young to up to today, like redeeming and holding and taking care of parts of me that I couldn't even recall or didn't want to see or were ashamed of or whatever. And so that is a process that happens over time. Ron stopped me today and was sharing something that he got from a Lorraine's podcast, and we were just talking about how hard it is to receive. But if we can open up that avenue, Christ is the one that gives us the power to even open up that avenue. So it's not about me, being able to do something. That's available to everyone. But that's where I feel most connected to who I am, the way I was created, the way I was made in the womb, the way I was designed to be. And that's where then is sorrow the most important thing? Is pain the most important thing? No, I don't think so. Because if I'm being led, if I'm being received, then that pales in comparison to what I'm receiving. And God is going to use all these wounds, all these things, not shame and not for us to protect ourselves from completely. And wherever you are on that journey, I'm not saying that you need to be vulnerable or open, because maybe you're not there yet. That's fine. Christ accepts us all along the way, no matter where we are, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't need to perform.
Yeah.
I just simply need to be open. And I think that's why he was saying, look, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Like, nothing can separate you from me. You gotta lose your life to gain it. You gotta let me drive. Like, there's all these things where he's just inviting us in over and over to the reality of the fact that he deeply loves us.
Yeah.
And that just, when you feel that in your chest and in your body, and you know it in your head, like I used to know a lot of these things in my head, I just couldn't feel them in my chest.
Yeah.
So I knew it was right. But when you actually feel those arms around you,
Yeah. Do you feel like obviously if that's the most important thing is that receiving, do you have any thoughts around how we cultivate being more open and receiving that more?
mostly it sucks. It's like, that's my experience of it. I think grace is very painful. Because it strips me down and shows me that I don't really have much to offer other than my willingness, right? Sometimes it's just beautiful and amazing. So I can be out fishing and receive. I can be in the Philippines and receive if I'm doing missions. I can make toast and be received. I can be mad at someone and receive. I can receive at any spot, really. And I think that picture of Christ walking along on the road to Emmaus is beautiful in the sense of not relieving the tension and the sorrow.
Yeah.
He's just like, what are you guys talking about? Glad I have this. He's curious, even though he knows.
Yeah. Yes.
And he's asking for our benefit. He just wants us to name it.
Yeah.
I don't know. We lost someone and we're screwed. Oh, cool. Walking along. Sitting down and eating with them. I still don't know. Because you guys seem sad. You guys seem broken. Breaks bread. What the? And then leaves. It's like that all the time. It's like he's dive bombing us and then leaving. But he's not going anywhere. He's right there. That's what I think is so painful, like he's there all the time. Also, beautiful. If he can't be with me while I walk through this, then I don't want anything to do with him. But if he's gonna walk through everything and be there for every step, and simply he just wants me to take it in, he's gonna do the rest. I can't do that out of my own effort. I don't think anybody can. But that's the beauty of it. I said over and over again. No matter how long we've been in faith or little, no matter how young or old, it doesn't matter. Then we just do it over and over again. And he's like, oh good, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I love you.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that line of he's curious even though he knows. And that's good. And that he is there to be received. Sorry, who am I? Oh yes, Pat.
I don't mean to be a Bedinsky, but just something that I found myself. I've had 3 adult children die from different things, sometimes illness and accidents. But I found out that we have a false and have been taught a false idea about sorrow and suffering. We think we should have this false face. Oh yeah, I'm getting through it, da, 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 da. God doesn't mind if you scream and holler and jump and throw plates and whatever you need to do. Christ is our example. If you look when he was in the garden, when he realized he was being rejected by his people, he cried, he wept, he was in sorrow. When he was in the garden, he was shredded.
Yeah.
And so that should show us that sorrow is a natural part of overcoming. You don't stay there, you don't stay in self-pity, but you say, this is another day. Because sorrow is in waves.
Yeah.
One day you're feeling, okay, I'm coping, and the next day you're completely smashed because something came up.
Yeah.
And so not to be discouraged because of these human emotions.
Yeah.
Because even in the Middle East, if you noticed in that culture, they take a couple of weeks out, they shred their clothes, they scream and holler. They have mourners that are around. Because there's something about timing and giving sorrow time to dissipate.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Pat. And I'm so sorry for all that loss. That's a lot of loss. And
I think too that that's brilliant. And if we all have to go through a personal exodus in Gethsemane, we have to leave something and suffer deeply to know joy.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Sometimes I usually reserve this for when I'm fishing alone, but I'll go to the Yakima River and take off the number of fishing things and get in the river, and I will scream and yell and cry and laugh. And then if there's people there, they probably think I'm freaking nuts. But the reality is, if I don't get that out somewhere, if I don't just scream and cry, and literally I just jump down into the cold river and try and wash it all off, right? But I feel like I'm there met well, because he understands that. If I can't embody that, then you're right, I have to put on a fake face. I just have to tell people how blessed I am, and then go home and suffer. And it just sucks. And there's nothing that feels worse than knowing what I really want and what I'm actually getting.
Yeah. We're gonna sharing communion here in just a moment, but I want to close with a quote that I came across from Tennessee Williams a couple weeks ago that feels like kind of speaks to this situation, because he said, "We live in a perpetually burning building, and what we must save from it is love." I think I would modify that just a little bit and say obviously it is a perpetually burning building. Like, the waves of sorrow are just ongoing, and the despair and the doubt, and it feels like that is just, there is not a time when we are out, that we're clear of all this over here. But what saves us, it's not what we're saving, I think it's what saves us is that love, that encounter with Christ in the midst of it, and that call out even as he's with us in it. And that's what the Lord's Supper reminds us of, is what he did to come and join us in it. So I'm going to pray, but thank you for being in on this and for just going there this morning. I love you.
Love you too.
So, Lord Jesus, I thank you for this conversation today, and that you show again and again that even when we don't see you, you're walking that road next to us in the midst of our pain and suffering, and you are curious. You want us to open up and share, and you already do know, and what a comfort that is. And I thank you for the message of the cross that is all about you stepping into our situation to lead us somewhere else. And we thank you for the hope of that sorrow and pain isn't the end, doesn't have the last word. And that someday we're going to share this meal with you. And we look forward to that. It's in your name we pray. Amen.